The night was still, the kind of stillness that seemed unnatural. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and a cold mist slithered across the ground like a living thing. Inside a towering, decaying laboratory hidden deep in a remote forest, a man stood in front of a row of cages, staring at the creatures that lurked behind bars. His name was Dr. Elias Carter, but most people simply referred to him as the mad scientist. His experiments were as dangerous as they were controversial. He had pushed the boundaries of science for years. But tonight was different. Dr. Carter had spent decades studying animal behavior, particularly the most dangerous creatures on Earth. He wasn't content with observing them from afar or studying their behavior through a glass screen. He wanted to understand them in the most intimate, unpredictable way possible. And he had a plan. The creatures in the cages were no ordinary animals. There was a venomous cobra, its black scales shimmering in the dim light, its hood expanding menacingly. In another cage, a pair of wild wolves paced back and forth, their yellow eyes glowing with hostility and intelligence. Nearby, a great white shark, suspended in a tank filled with brackish water, thrashed its tail in agitation. Dr. Carter wasn't content with merely studying their instincts. He had an ambition. He wanted to know what happened when humans and these deadly creatures came face to face, under his control. For months, he'd been testing theories, carefully calibrating his equipment, and testing his own limits. But tonight, the stage was set for something far more sinister. He'd already convinced a team of curious, thrill-seeking individuals to be a part of his experiment. They weren't scientists or animal experts. They were volunteers. But what Dr. Carter didn't tell them was the real danger they were about to face. As the volunteers arrived, they were briefed in a small, sterile room. Their faces were filled with excitement and nervousness, but they didn't realize just how dangerous this would be. They thought they were signing up for an experience, a game of sorts, nothing more than a few harmless encounters with dangerous animals. In the name of science, what they didn't know was that Dr. Carter had devised a twisted game of his own, a game that would pit them against the deadliest creatures in the world. The first volunteer, a young woman named Anna, stepped forward eagerly. She had a keen interest in animal behavior, and her passion for reptiles had led her to sign up for this experiment. She stood tall, her hands trembling slightly as she glanced at the cobra's cage. She had no idea what she was about to experience. "Are you ready, Anna?" Dr. Carter asked, his voice smooth and calculating. Anna nodded, her heart racing, though she tried to hide it. She had been briefed on the basic guidelines. Stay calm, avoid sudden movements, and keep a safe distance. But none of that mattered once the creature was let loose. Dr. Carter motioned to one of his assistants, and the assistant unlocked the cage. With a hiss, the cobra reared up, its hood flaring, eyes locked onto Anna's face. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The snake's tongue flicked in and out, testing the air, and then, without warning, it lunged. A collective gasp rose from the small crowd gathered in the observation room as the creature struck. Its fangs narrowly missing Anna's face, she stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. But Dr. Carter wasn't satisfied. This was just the beginning. Part 2. The danger escalates. The tension in the air thickened as Dr. Carter motioned for Anna to step forward again. Her pulse was hammering in her throat, and her mind screamed for her to flee, but she didn't. She knew this was the moment when the experiment truly began. The snake had retreated back into the shadows of its cage, its hood still flared, eyes gleaming with malevolence. Anna took a deep breath, her legs shaking slightly beneath her, but she regained her composure. She could feel the eyes of the other volunteers burning into her back as they observed from behind thick glass walls. Dr. Carter stood to the side, his eyes alight with excitement. "This is where we see the truth," he muttered to himself. "Fear, control, and instinct. Everything we've been taught is about to change." Anna didn't understand what he meant by that, but as the seconds ticked by, she began to realize the full extent of the twisted game she was caught in. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about being controlled, manipulated, and tested in ways that defied natural laws. The doors to the next chamber opened, revealing a new creature, a wolf, its fur matted with dirt and its yellow eyes glimmering with aggression, stepped into the room. It growled low in its throat, testing the air for the scent of danger. Its powerful muscles rippled beneath its thick coat, and its gaze shifted from Anna to the team of assistants standing just beyond the glass walls. Dr. Carter's voice rang out once more, commanding Anna's attention. Now, Anna, you must engage. Approach the wolf slowly and carefully. See if you can calm it. Anna felt a surge of dread flood her chest. The idea of walking toward a wild, predatory animal, especially one as dangerous as this wolf, was incomprehensible. But she had no choice. Dr. Carter's gaze was unblinking, and the room was dead silent, save for the occasional shuffle of movement from the animal. With trembling hands, Anna stepped forward. The wolf didn't move. Its gaze fixed on her. Her breath was shallow, her body tense as she approached. She had read about animal behavior before. Read about the need to show dominance in the face of predators. But standing here, with the wolf in front of her, the theory seemed like nothing more than words. As she neared the creature, the wolf growled again, its low voice vibrating in her bones. She stopped. The growl was more than a warning. It was a challenge. She had come too close. Suddenly, the wolf lunged, its claws slashing at the air. Anna gasped, narrowly avoiding its deadly strike, her heart leaping into her throat. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet and crashing to the cold concrete floor. The volunteers watching from behind the glass recoiled, their faces pale with fear. Dr. Carter's lips curled into a smile, his eyes reflecting the twisted delight of someone watching a carefully orchestrated experiment unfold. Part 3. The experiment unravels. As the hours wore on, the experiment began to take on an even darker tone. The once innocent volunteers began to realize that they weren't part of an educational experience. They were part of something far more sinister. Dr. Carter wasn't studying animals, he was studying fear. Human fear. After the wolf encounter, the volunteers were divided into groups and instructed to interact with different creatures. Some faced the deadly shark, which had been pulled from the depths of the ocean and held captive in a specially designed tank. Others were placed in cages with poisonous spiders, their bodies glistening with venomous toxins, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. One by one, the creatures tested the volunteers' courage, but it wasn't the animals that scared them the most. It was Dr. Carter's complete disregard for their safety. The experiments were escalating at a terrifying pace, each new encounter more dangerous than the last. And all the while, Dr. Carter watched from the shadows, observing their every move, taking notes. But what he hadn't accounted for was the growing sense of rebellion within the group. They were no longer willing to simply be subjects in his experiment. They wanted out. They wanted to survive. And in the deepest, darkest corners of the lab, something began to stir. Anna, who had narrowly escaped the wolf's claws, found herself questioning Dr. Carter's true motives. He spoke often of his research, of how he believed humans could be molded through fear, transformed into something more than human. But as the days dragged on and the creatures became more aggressive, Anna began to wonder if Dr. Carter had lost all sense of morality. Part 4. The final test. It was late in the evening when the final test was announced. Dr. Carter gathered the remaining volunteers together in the main chamber. The air was thick with anticipation, each person silently wondering what they would face next. Dr. Carter's voice echoed through the room as he spoke, his tone calm but tinged with madness. This is the final test. You have survived the venomous cobra, the ferocious wolf, and the unpredictable shark. Now, you will face the ultimate challenge, the one that will determine your true nature. Will you cower in fear, or will you rise above it? The doors to the final chamber creaked open, and the volunteers stood frozen, their gazes fixed on the creature lurking inside. It was something they hadn't anticipated, a hybrid, a mix of the deadliest qualities of the creatures they had faced before. It was a predator, something far worse than they could ever have imagined, and it was waiting for them. Part 5. The final escape. The hybrid creature lunged at them with terrifying speed. The air was filled with chaos, screams, the sound of claws scraping against the floor, and the desperate thud of feet against concrete as the volunteers scrambled to escape. But no one was prepared for the real twist. The truth about Dr. Carter's motives. As the hybrid bore down on them, they realized that escaping this place wasn't just about running from the creature. It was about escaping the psychological trap Dr. Carter had set for them. He wanted them to fear not just the animals, but the idea of survival itself. In a final act of defiance, Anna and the others fought back. They used everything they had learned about fear and survival to defeat the creature, escaping the nightmare that Dr. Carter had carefully constructed. But as they fled the lab, they couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was lurking in the shadows. They had survived the creatures, but what about the man who had made them face their worst nightmares? The lab doors closed behind them, but they knew they hadn't truly escaped. Not yet.